Welcome to Lynn Cullen Live. Talk radio without the static. Email your questions and comments to lynncullenshow@gmail.com. And now your host, Lynn Cullen.
To ya. Hi, how you doing? Here I is. Man, somehow when I heard, here's your host, I thought, women had to fight to be called a host. Back in the day, I would have been, here's your hostess, right? I don't think anyone ever called me that. Anyway, I read something this morning that just blew me away. And it is not that I learned anything new exactly. I mean, it's everything I read, I'd known, but had never necessarily put it all together as wonderfully as these two gentlemen did. And I want to share it with you because I think as we look at all of the challenges that we as a nation face in preserving what we now realize is a fragile democracy, I think that what this article says is the heart of the problem. And it worries me because it's something that is almost impossible to correct. Almost as if the founding fathers unwittingly hid a poison pill in the remarkable document that was the U.S. Constitution. Now, I just want to let me walk you through some of this because to me it's fascinating. First of all, that Constitution, our Constitution, was and is still obviously an extraordinarily important historical document, not just for us, but for the world. Because America, and you might not realize this, that document and the American Revolution made America the first large nation to rule itself without a monarchy and instead to fill its most important offices with regular elections. I mean, it hadn't happened until the founders of this nation, crafted that document. And the force of that revolutionary document was felt around the world, a world that was governed by monarchs. And over the next century and more, our Constitution served as a model for reformers, anti-monarchist, democratic reformers around the world. So never, as much as we now see its flaws, and it has left us now in a precarious state, it was and remains in that regard an extraordinary document. But, and we're living it now, we now know that American democracy, which I think we all took for granted, is at great risk. And in fact, these academic types around the world who actually rank democratic governments have flagged the United States, which always used to be at the top of the good democracy list. And we are now accused of being democratic backsliders. And we know that's true. Our increasing political violence, everything we've seen unleashed by Republican Trumpist politics, the threats against election workers, efforts to keep people from voting. My God, the effort to overturn the result of a election. I mean, these are things that don't happen in a healthy democracy. And we are not. So the organizations that track the health of democracies all around the world, they actually do put numbers on it. One of them is the Freedom House's Global Freedom Index. And countries are scored on a 0 to 100 scale. And not too long ago, 2015, we had a score of 90. Be the year before Trump. We had a score of 90. And that's pretty much in the same territory as Canada and Germany and France. But since then, the backslide. And so our most recent score, which is from 2 years ago now, 1921, and I'm sure it will be lower next time it comes out. We went from 90 to 83. I'm willing to bet we'll be in the 70s. That 83 is lower than every established democracy in Western Europe. So we, the nation that birthed the idea of the people controlling their government, controlling their own fate, we now are not leaders in democracy. And the problem, I mean, there's many problems, obviously, but at the heart of it, and this has occurred to us as we've talked about what's going on and how we fix it. At the heart of our problem, and it breaks my heart to say it, is the U.S. Constitution. That's where the trouble is. It has now become a document that protects minority rule. And that's not what a democracy is, right? It's not what a democracy is. At the very basic aspect is that whatever the most people desire is, generally speaking, what you get in a democracy. In our country, we are now living under minority rule. The fact is, in the United States, under the Constitution, the majority can't win power. And even if they win power, they often are stymied in attempts to govern. You do not see in any other democratic nation a president being elected who came in second in the vote. the guy taking the oath of office lost. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the last two Republican presidents that we have suffered under have been losers in the national election. George W. Bush, who was pushed over the top by the Supreme Court, but he lost the popular vote. And then, of course, Donald Trump. So we've got a country now in which you can vote. And your choice can lose, even though seemingly your choice won. And we know this from the makeup. But our Senate, sort of our House of Lords, the upper house, it is so outrageously overrepresents low population states. It's just ludicrous. And the Senate is often controlled by the party that represents the minority of the people, as it does now. That's not true. I guess technically the Democrats control it by a razor-thin majority. Because all those big whole states with no people in them get two senators, populous states where a lot of Democrats live get two senators. And so we know that that's how that works. So the Senate, our legislative body, is not representative of the people. And then you got, as if the Senate wasn't bad enough, then you've got their arcane rules, their filibuster rules, where even, majority votes within the body are blocked from passing. This is democracy. And finally, because the people who sit on the Supreme Court, the third branch, are determined by the executive branch, the president and the Senate. Well, guess what? That is also not representative, the Supreme Court, of the people. And in fact, we are seeing now the Supreme Court, more and more just divorced from majority public opinion. So when people look at how democracies flourish or how they die, one of the things that is looked at is how are they able to correct their processes if things are clearly going in the wrong direction. Now, how do we correct what we see as clearly something that's not working anymore? You what? Amend the Constitution. Of all the democracies in the world that are studied that look somewhat like ours, we are at the top of the degree of difficulty in changing our Constitution. Not only, do you remember from your civics class what it takes? A constitutional amendment requires the approval of 2/3 majorities in both the House and the Senate. Okay? And then must be ratified by 75% of the states. It's almost impossible to do now. It is impossible to do. Has been impossible to do for some time. Do you know how many times there has been an effort to amend our Constitution? Almost 12,000 attempts in the history of our country. Almost 12,000 attempts have been made, and the reality is only 27. 27. I don't know what the percentage there is, but it is abysmally low. 27 have made it. And actually, you peel off the first 10, the Bill of Rights, and you got only 17 making it. It has most recently been amended over 30 years ago, in 92. Now, I mean, every time we have an election, I do start railing about the Electoral College, how undemocratic it is. I often rail about the Senate, how undemocratic it is. But the reality is if we don't fix this, our democracy will continue to die. We will continue to have a party that most people do not want controlling the Supreme Court, the Congress, and often the executive branch. So knowing this, here, the last effort to get rid of the Electoral College was the year I graduated from high school, and a wonderful Indiana senator, back when they had Democrats as senators in Indiana, Birch Bayh, he chaired, he was on the Senate Judiciary Committee, and he proposed a constitutional amendment to get rid of the damn Electoral College and replace it with what any democracy should have had in the beginning: a direct presidential vote. Whoever gets the most votes on election day is the president. And do you know, everybody thought it was a brilliant idea. Everybody. 63%, well, a majority, thought it was a brilliant idea, the poll said. For God's sakes, the Chamber of Commerce, this very rock-ribbed business entity, conservative as hell, polled its membership and found 90% of them in favor of getting rid of this absurdity called the Electoral College. The American Bar Association added its endorsement and said the Electoral College, good God, it's archaic, it's undemocratic, it's complex, ambiguous, indirect, and frankly, it's dangerous. All this, guys, was 1966, 67. Okay? Just to place it for you. And then in 69, these things move slowly. The House of Representatives, the lower house, started the process of getting rid of the Electoral College. And in 1969, damn, if the House of Representatives did not vote overwhelmingly to abolish the Electoral College, to amend the Constitution. That vote was 338 to 70. And then it goes to the Senate. A Gallup poll taken at the time showed 81% of Americans supported the amendment. The New York Times did a survey of state legislatures, seeing if the Senate passed, would it make it through 3/4 of state legislatures, and found that 30 were already obviously on board. 6 were undecided. It seemed like this was well within reach. But it never made it out of the Senate. The Senate killed it. And like so many times it killed it, the opposition was from representatives of southern states and smaller states. I mean, less populous states. So there you have it. If it couldn't, I mean, there's no way anything like that could get through now. That was the last time. It got tried a few more times, never got as close. 2016, a year that will live in infamy. The Democratic Party won the national popular vote for the presidency. It won the popular vote for the Senate. And the Republicans, nevertheless, won control of both. Donald Trump took the oath of office, and the Senate was controlled by Republicans, even though they had pretty overwhelmingly lost the popular vote. And you and I know what then Mitch McConnell, Donald Trump did in terms of the Supreme Court. So a president who lost the popular vote and senators who also represented not the majority of American people, but a minority of American people, packed the court. 3 Supreme Court seats, giving the court a 6-3 ultra-conservative majority. And this is how minority rule works. The executive was not representative of the people's desire. The Senate, not representative of the people's desire. And those two minorities, executive and legislative, install a totally conservative Supreme Court, not representative of the majority of Americans. And what makes this so dangerous is that the party that benefits from this undemocratic structure that has instead become a privileged and partisan minority has, and you can understand it from their point of view, has understandably abandoned its commitment to democracy. And they don't get elected, so screw democracy. But they have been able, because of our Constitution, to use this structure to maintain their power. So the Constitution, our much revered Constitution, is protecting and empowering an authoritarian, anti-democratic, partisan minority, the Republicans. That's what I read this morning. It's sobering, huh? It's really sobering. Because I don't see any pathway. We, the people, still profess to care about legality and the constitutional framework. And we understand that there is a way that you go about reforming it. But it's impossible because the people's will is not represented by the outcome of our elections. And we have clearly minority rule. You know, I was just looking today. By the way, that is from The Atlantic, and it's essentially excerpted from a book, if you're interested. It's a fascinating read. I didn't in any way get it. It's long, and talks about other democracies and what they did and how they are set up. And believe me, we are, almost every other democracy has so much of an easier way of correcting things when they go awry. And we're incapable of it. Not because we don't want to, but because the founding fathers tied our hands. The piece in The Atlantic is called, if you want to look it up, How American Democracy Fell So Far Behind. And the book, the guys who wrote it are Stephen Levitsky and Daniel Ziblatt. And their book is Tyranny of the Minority. Why American Democracy Reached the Breaking Point. They absolutely have nailed it. There it is. And I was, and so seeing that sort of all pulled together so well, so clearly. And then, I start reading the rest of the paper and I see how Republicans' total embrace of minority rule now, of tripping up democracy as much as they can, of using their minority powers to prevent the majority from governing. You may recall that there was this election that normally wouldn't have gotten much attention this spring in Wisconsin, a state that has fallen from one of the most progressive states in the union to one of the most authoritarian, Republican controlled crazy places in the country. And you may recall that there was a Supreme Court election. And in Wisconsin, what happens regularly is statewide elections. Almost invariably, the Democrat wins. It's why there's a Democratic governor. The state legislature is so overwhelmingly Republican, you could throw, throw a bomb into the chamber and you wouldn't, I don't know if a Democrat would be in any way harmed because there aren't any. Now, how does that happen? Well, that happens through what minorities do to maintain power, gerrymandering. Cooking the books so that the legislative branch will be controlled by them and flouting the will of the people. And so this liberal justice was elected to the court, and it flipped the Wisconsin Supreme Court so that the liberals now control by one vote. And oh boy, the gerrymandering is in trouble because everything now goes before a court in which the Republicans have lost their power. So do you know what they're doing? This is just, I read this and I thought, are you kidding me? There is already an effort underway by the Republicans in Wisconsin at the highest levels to impeach the newest. Never mind, she has not even heard a case. The court hasn't even held a session. She has been given the oath. She hasn't done a damn thing. And they're out to get her. And guess what? The impeachment process, they control. Think about impeachment. If they control the legislative branches, both lower and upper, why, they can take her out. The will of the people. Be damned. This is how Republicans work. Now, they're a dangerous party. Anyone who votes for any member of this dangerous party is aiding and abetting the destruction of American democracy. Alabama. My God, the Supreme Court, this right-wing, ultra-conservative Supreme Court stunned everybody by saying to Alabama, guys, hey man, your gerrymandered congressional map is like such a cartoon of what gerrymandering is that we can't, I mean, come on. It can't stand. You can't be that ludicrously unfair. So clearly racist. So the Supreme Court tells, you'll remember this happened earlier this year, tells Alabama to redraw that map. That's absolutely, it does not pass constitutional muster. So Alabama redrew the map. And it's no different. Slightly, maybe black people can inch up to getting maybe 40% of a vote in one of the districts. And so that too, they thumbed their nose. Alabama just thumbed its nose at the Supreme Court. Did not do what the court asked them to do. They put out another totally unconstitutional map so they can keep power unfairly. And what happened? God bless the judicial system. Because somebody called foul and sent it to the courts, the second map. And a day or two ago, a 3-judge federal appeals court said, this is ridiculous. You guys didn't even try. You didn't even try to do what the Supreme Court asked you to do. This is still totally unconstitutional. And you know what we're going to do? We're going to say there needs to be a new map. And guess what? You can't draw it. It will be drawn by an independent entity away from the Republicans. Now that court, that 3-judge court, two of the judges on that court are Trump judges. That's how egregious Republicans are now. So there's that. So, all right, I'll stop. I think it's important that we understand what the challenges we face are, and how dire the situation is, and in many ways how every election, our side, the majority side, our side starts the race handicapped. It's like we got weights on our ankles. And that's just the way it is. And there's nothing we can do about it. That's the Electoral College, and that's Republican state legislatures busily doing everything they can to take people's votes away, to cook the books. It's funny how the idea of a rigged election is something the Republicans have always squawked about. Yeah. Yeah. Because they know the way elections work. If they're done fairly, they can't win. They can't get power. Okay. Oh, that turned out to be heavier than I thought. I'm actually sweating. I'm hardly alone on that score, right? I was thinking the other day of that. What's that old story about a frog, in a pot of boiling water? Or you put a frog in water and you just slowly, at first it's fine. Frog notices it's getting a little warm in here. But the frog keeps sort of adjusting. It's a little warmer, a little warm. And I was thinking, we're sort of like the frogs in the boiling water now, aren't we? Because I was out, walking the dog like you have to. And normally I wouldn't step foot in this hot weather. I hate it. But I find myself, okay, adjusting, just adjusting to it. Okay, that's the way it is. You sort of go around with a glow. I'm always wet. And that's the other thing. So much of the stuff that I want to talk to you about is weather related. Another big problem and challenge facing this country that we've done nothing about. Nothing. And it's sort of like what global warming, how, we were warned. And of course, Republicans always spreading, lies and misinformation, said, oh, it's bull, it's a hoax, it's this and that. Whatever science says is bullshit. Now we're seeing, okay, everything they said, we're seeing, and then some. And even then, they push back. So this refusal to deal with anything until it is at a point where dealing with it becomes not only crisis level, but perhaps impossible. This is where we are. And I guess it's, again, our inability to ever think proactively, ever look down the road. And I think people do, but if you're an elected person, you can't be elected by telling people, hey, we got to do something about our crumbling infrastructure. We got to do all the things that need to be taken care of. You can't sell that to a voter. And so they don't try. And so our infrastructure crumbles, our climate warms, and our water disappears. And it's the water thing that I've really been focusing on, because the New York Times did an astonishingly frightening, big story the other day. I've got it here. It scared the bejeebers out of me. Was this Saturday? It's the story of what is happening in our country to our groundwater, the stuff under the ground, the aquifer, which is where most of our water comes from. It's where, when you see, irrigation, they're pumping up water from the aquifer. Our aquifers are being drained at a rate that is so alarming. It will not be long. It's sort of like the global warming thing, because I remember talking about that 20 years ago and nobody listening. And I'll talk about this, but we're going to be, you know what? And I know it's true. Water will be like gold. Water, oil. States with no water. I don't know. Are they going to go to war with states that have water? What's going to happen? Now, we're sitting pretty up here. We got 3 rivers. I'm from the Great Lakes region. All those folks, they're in great shape. But oh my God, there are parts of this country that are drying up so quickly that agriculture is threatened. And stop and think about this. Listen to somebody who in Oklahoma. This is some guy in Oklahoma who sits on a regulatory board that's supposed to be overseeing water, and he is interviewed, and he owns up to the fact that the groundwater in Oklahoma is truly drying up. It's close to gone. And yet the state is not educating its citizenry about it. And listen to what he said. If we start showing that kind of data, that kind of goes into your property values. I mean, if we show that an area may be depleted of water, let's say in 2 years, well, if someone tries to sell that property, they're not going to be able to. Think about that. Every year since 1940, more wells in this country have seen falling water levels than rising levels since 1940. And the federal government, in regard to aquifers and water supply, does not have any power, has no role. So the power of what to do with water falls to states and often municipalities. And so there are all kinds of different rules and whatever. So as the rising temperatures shrink the rivers, that's happening, farmers and towns pump more groundwater to make up the difference. But by draining the groundwater, the aquifers, that, by the way, filled up their reservoirs over millions of years, the very least thousands of years, they're there's no way that will make up the difference. And in fact, there will be many places in the United States that are now totally populated that will run out of drinking water. And you're already seeing it. I think there's outside of Phoenix. They've stopped development of some places because there's no way, if you build homes there, that the people who might buy those homes are going to be able to have water. Again, Pennsylvania is in much better shape. There is a map of where the aquifer is like unbelievably, scarily low. And right in the middle of the country is where the biggest troubles are, from Texas up through Oklahoma and Kansas. Also in the South and in California. In Arkansas, one of the country's biggest users of groundwater, more than twice as much water is being pumped every year from its main aquifer as rainfall and other sources put back in. More than twice is being taken out than is going in. And that is unsustainable, but it's not changing any of the behavior. And on top of it, you know what Arkansas's, one of its big agricultural crops is? Rice. I mean, that is as water-intensive agricultural product as you can have, rice. And Arkansas produces half the nation's rice. Did you know that? Using water that they can ill afford to use. There's trouble in Maryland. One of the counties there is looking at piping in water from elsewhere or building a treatment plant to remove salt from the Potomac. But problem there is that would increase the cost of people's water by 10 times. See, all of these things are going to be the stories you're going to be hearing about soon. And on top of it, if you overpump this stuff, I mean, big agriculture is a huge part of this problem, by the way. Huge part. The thing is when you overpump, you end up contaminating often the remaining water, and the remaining water becomes unsafe. In coastal areas, you get something called saltwater intrusion. And that is already happening in parts of the Northeast, in the mid-Atlantic states, in Florida, the Gulf Coast, in California. Already, they're seeing this saltwater intrusion. I won't even get into the arsenic. That's part of the problem, too. Oh, my God. Okay, so again, this is what the New York Times did an extraordinary bunch of reporting on this. It's, you know, the kind of reporting that most people avoid reading because it's, well, unsettling. But one of the reasons we're in the trouble we're in is because we're somehow avoiding difficult issues, right? I mean, somebody's got to be willing to look at this stuff and look at it squarely. But again, don't expect politicians to do that, because the voters they face are not a serious lot. And they don't generally do things. They are not in favor of proactivity. They're always in favor of reactivity. So there's a problem for democracy. So remember yesterday when I mentioned about Burning Man, that that smart cookie that argues before the Supreme Court, Neil Katyal, managed to escape, and we posted online about it. Well, the blowback. Listen to this. This is not. So he posted that he had, made it out, and one of the people indicted by Fonnie Willis in Atlanta, or is it by? Wait, who got him? Jeffrey Clark, the guy who would be Attorney General, that idiot, the one in Philly, who the Republican Perry, congressman, said could save the day for Trump. Jeffrey Clark, who's going to go to jail. Jeffrey Clark tweeted after seeing that Neil Katyal had been at Burning Man. Listen to what he tweeted. Why am I not surprised that Neil Katyal made it a priority to go to a neo-pagan ritual? Pray that these folks come to the light and realize that the only path is through and to our Lord. We are all fallen and need God and to repent as a nation. Boy, you talk about repenting and fallen. God knows Jeffrey Clark should have some idea about that, but he's already gone full, I don't know. So he is saying that, that figures. This guy who would put me in jail is off at some neo-pagan rite. And the wonderful thing is Katyal's response. Here it is. Dear criminal defendant Clark, I am a Hindu. Are you suggesting I do not belong in this country? You might be better off studying our founders, the text of our First Amendment, and, albeit for other reasons, the criminal code. I sincerely wish you the best. Neil. Oh, gosh. Oh, dear. So, there's that. What's the other thing I have for you here? Oh, God in heaven. Did you see, by the way, they're saying that, people are going to, because Trump is refusing to help all of the people who went to the mat for him, who are now in legal jeopardy for him, Rudy Giuliani being one, and a lot of his co-defendants in Georgia, Jenna Ellis. I mean, these are people who have begged him to please help me. I don't have money like you do, and he does either. Whatever, you got to help me. And they're going to turn on him. Why doesn't he see that? I don't know. I mean, he's turning on he'll turn on anybody. He's the proverbial guy who'd run over his own mother, to save his neck. He'd run over his own children, and he already has, apparently. The deposition that came out of one of the trials, we lose track. I think it's a trial of the state attorney general about his inflating his business. He actually was, he had to be deposed under oath, and he was asked if it was he who had the ultimate decision making authority at the Trump organization. I mean, that's like a duh. It's the Donald Trump organization. It's him. Yeah. And he was asked that under oath, and he said no. The transcript shows he answered that question no. My son, Eric, is much more involved than I am. I've been doing other things. Wow. 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 Jeez. What a vile. I don't even like thinking of as human because it despoils the rest of us Homo sapiens. Actually, I do have two other water stories, but if you start paying attention to this, you do start seeing that there is an effort on the part of journalism to alert us to these huge problems that are going to create extraordinary upheaval. And then you look at like what our political parties talk about. Well, our political party. I mean, what? I mean, it's extraordinary. Dana Milbank had an interesting piece on mosquitoes and how everything we do screws everything else up. we don't want mosquitoes around us, but everything we've done has created more and more. Because we destroy the natural ecosystem all the time with our pesticides and our other stuff. And the things that used to be around to help keep mosquito populations under control, well, they ain't there. And anywhere near the numbers they used to be. So the mosquitoes win. We lose. And our, level of stupidity and sort of intransigent stupidity is just gobsmacking. Really is. Hey, I came upon an obit, and I'm not going to talk much about it. There was just a fact in the obit that blew me away. And I'm going to end on this. It's another not particularly happy subject, but it's an obit for a woman who was a documentarian and also worked as the photo editor at the New York Times. Her name is Nancy Bursky. And at the New York Times, she was choosing a picture to illustrate a story on the drought in Sudan. And she saw a picture that froze her. You've seen it. We've all seen it. And when she saw it, she said, "This is going to win the paper its first ever Pulitzer Prize in photography." Put it on the front page. This is amazing. Well, the Times did not put it on the front page, but they did win the Pulitzer. The picture was one anybody seeing it would never forget. So when I describe it to you, you will immediately remember. It was taken in 1993. It was a picture of a little emaciated 2-year-old, 2 or 3-year-old, who knows, sort of squatting desert. And looming in the background was a vulture sitting there. The vulture looked bigger than the kid. It was the most harrowing picture I think I've ever seen. And what happened was when that picture was published. The New York Times was deluged with inquiries from people who'd seen it, saying, "My God, what did the photographer, like, after he took the picture, did he save this child? What the hell?" I mean, I remember the talking about it, brought up all those subjects of what does a photographer do in a situation like that? Do you be the journalist who gets the Pulitzer? Do you this? Do you that? Blah 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 blah. Here's the thing I read from the piece that blew me away. The guy who took the picture was named Kevin Carter. He was a South African photojournalist. And a few months after that picture won the Pulitzer Prize, he killed himself. He was 33 years old. Now, you might assume from that it would be guilt, but it also says in the obit that the Times responded to the people that were worrying about what had happened to the child. And they said that a photographer, after taking the picture, chased away the vulture, and that the child made its way to a feeding center. Now, I don't know if that's hooey or what, because if he didn't, I mean, you would think if he killed himself, it was out of extraordinary guilt, right? I can't even begin to imagine. I want to know more about that. But if he did do the right thing, he took the picture, then he saved the child, he threw it, but maybe he didn't do enough. I have no idea. That's an extraordinary story. Kevin Carter, 33-year-old recipient of a Pulitzer Prize, and he commits suicide. A picture that none of us can ever forget. All right, that's it for me. Thank you very much for being there. Stay cool. See you tomorrow.
Lynn Cullen Live, Monday through Thursday from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. and archived at pghcitypaper.com. The opinions expressed on Lynn Cullen Live are those of the host and do not necessarily reflect the viewpoints of Pittsburgh City Paper or its advertisers.